The morning air was crisp and carried the faint scent of dew from the water surrounding my property. Sunlight glimmered across the calm surface, making it look peaceful, almost deceptively so. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, expecting the usual quiet of early mornings. But the sight that greeted me stopped me cold. The bridge, the only road connecting my property to the outside world, was gone. Completely dismantled. Concrete barriers blocked both ends, and workers in hard hats were methodically taking apart what remained. Across the water, the HOA president stood with a smug smile, watching as if she had just won a victory that had been a long time coming. My heart pounded in my chest. This bridge wasn't just a structure, it was my lifeline. Without it, my property was cut off, isolated from everything I depended on, groceries, emergency services, even my ability to leave. Panic surged momentarily, but deep beneath it was a spark of defiance. I wouldn't allow them to trap me. I had lived here for years, nurtured this land, and watched the neighborhood grow. The HOA, with its subtle manipulations, arbitrary fines, and oppressive rules, had always tried to assert control. But this? This was a step too far. Her voice echoed across the quiet morning, cold and taunting, "You'll have to wait until we finish our work." Wait? Never. I was not going to surrender. Retreating inside, I spread out old property maps, utility layouts, and community records across the kitchen table. Every utility line, hidden path, and maintenance access I could find became a potential lifeline. I noticed a faint trace of a forgotten trail around the blocked bridge, a path that had long been neglected, overgrown, and almost invisible. Dangerous, yes. Risky? Absolutely. But it was the only way. The morning sun climbed higher, and the shadows of trees stretched across my yard, highlighting the precariousness of my situation. I began documenting the scene, photos, videos, timestamps. Every movement of the workers, every subtle violation of HOA rules, every arrogant gesture of the president, all captured. The morning calm contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in my mind. I tested the hidden path cautiously, each step over tangled brush and slippery rocks filling me with both fear and adrenaline. The HOA thought they could force me out quietly, using bureaucracy and intimidation. But in doing so, they had underestimated me. Every quiet morning, every deceptive calm, now became the perfect cover for planning my counterattack. As I walked the path again and again, memorizing every turn and obstacle, I realized the battle wasn't just about the bridge, it was about reclaiming control over my own life. The sunlight sparkled on the water below, reflecting both the beauty and the stakes of the fight ahead. Today, I had been cornered. But cornered animals find their sharpest claws. By late morning, I had a rough plan forming. The bridge was gone, but I had a way. The HOA had thought they could isolate me physically and mentally. They were wrong. I was preparing, patiently, strategically, for the day I would turn the tables, and the morning light seemed to give me courage, signaling that this was the beginning, not the end. The morning sun rose gently over the water, casting a warm golden hue across the neighborhood. Mist clung to the surface, curling like smoke over the calm water, and the faint chirping of birds contrasted sharply with the tension inside me. The previous day's shock still lingered, but now it had transformed into a simmering determination. The HOA had thought they could trap me, that by cutting the bridge, they could isolate and intimidate me. But mornings like this, quiet and deceptive, were the perfect time to plan my counter. I moved along the overgrown, hidden path I had discovered the day before. Each step was careful, deliberate, slipping on a wet route could alert the workers across the water or leave me stranded in the brush. My coffee had long gone cold, but the adrenaline kept me alert. I traced every old maintenance trail and utility access I could find, memorizing twists and turns, noting weaknesses in the board's defenses. This path wasn't just a physical lifeline, it was a metaphor for the plan forming in my mind. Inside my house, I spread out all the evidence I had collected over weeks. Photographs of past violations, videos of the board ignoring rules, official documents showing their overreach, everything had a place in the plan. The HOA had assumed that no one kept track of their minor infractions over the years, that their power was absolute. They were wrong. I now had the tools not only to reclaim access to my property but to expose every overreach, every act of arrogance, every attempt to intimidate residents like me. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating every corner of my property, I began mapping out my strategy. It had to be precise. Direct confrontation was too risky, legal avenues would take time. The key was leverage, evidence the HOA couldn't ignore, allies they couldn't discredit. I reached out quietly to neighbors who had been silenced over the years, who had endured arbitrary fines, unjust inspections, and manipulative tactics. Many were hesitant, fearful of retaliation, but the morning sunlight seemed to embolden them, and one by one, they agreed to support me. Contractors who had worked on past projects provided testimony confirming violations and improper approvals. Local officials, frustrated by repeated complaints, became potential allies, ready to scrutinize the bridge removal and HOA actions. Every quiet morning observation, every subtle detail I had logged, now became a strategic asset. My plan was forming like a map of the perfect storm, each thread, each move designed to hit them where it hurt most, their reputation, their control, their illusion of untouchable authority. By mid-morning, I began rehearsing the path and the sequence of actions in my head. Cameras hidden along the path would capture every step I took, documenting access points and potential hazards. Legal documents would be submitted strategically, timed to coincide with media release and council attention. Neighbors would act as witnesses. Every element of surprise, every loophole exploited, every moment captured, it all had to align perfectly. Walking along the misty path, I felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation. The sun sparkled off the water, highlighting the stakes. This wasn't just about reclaiming a road. It was about autonomy, dignity, and justice. The HOA had built their power on the assumption that people like me could be silenced, trapped, and intimidated. But mornings like this were a reminder, strategy and patience could turn the tables in ways they never imagined. By late morning, the blueprint was complete. I had a sequence of moves, a series of allies, a timeline for releasing evidence, and an escape route should anything go wrong. The bridge was still gone, the HOA still smug, but I had discovered their weaknesses. The seemingly calm, golden morning held the tension of a storm yet to strike. I took a deep breath, feeling the sun on my face, and whispered to myself. Today's planning was the calm before the storm, and soon, the HOA would realize they had underestimated me completely. The morning arrived with a thin veil of mist over the water, the kind of soft light that makes everything look fragile and possible. I woke before dawn, heart steady but focused, the plan drilled into me like a map burned on my palms. Today was not for second-guessing. The bridge was still gone. The HOA board was still smug. But I had allies, evidence, and the one advantage they never suspected, time and preparation. I moved along the hidden path with cameras strapped to my chest and backups tucked into the undergrowth, silent witnesses to every step. The air tasted like metal and resolve. Each footfall through wet leaves sounded enormous in my ears, as if the morning itself was amplifying the moment. When I crested the last ridge and stepped onto the road that hugged the water, I saw them, the board members arriving in their polished cars, their faces still smoothed by confidence, unaware that the narrative they'd been crafting for months was about to be ripped apart in a single morning. I triggered the first move, a discreet press release, timed to hit local outlets the second those cars parked. The photographers I'd quietly briefed were in position, the video crews I'd contacted the night before activated live feeds. Within minutes, the quiet neighborhood hummed with a new electricity. Phones buzzed in pockets, and the HOA president's smug smile faltered as she caught sight of reporters setting up. I watched her try to recover her composure, an effort that looked smaller by the second. Then I walked up to the nearest board member, handed them a thick envelope of documents, and calmly explained that everything, every illegal order, every unauthorized fine, every bypassed permit, was now public. I watched the color drain from their faces as they skimmed a page: contractor invoices, dated warnings ignored by the board, emails showing the president's private instruction to remove the bridge without council approval. The cameras caught everything. The morning sun glinted off printed pages and TV lenses alike. Neighbors began to arrive, guided by messages I'd sent earlier, text threads, discreet knocks on doors, the simple human urge to stand with someone finally willing to fight. People I'd barely exchanged greetings with stepped forward, offering testimonies of their own fines, their own small humiliations. Contractors I'd convinced over coffee and quiet conversations showed up with their own sworn statements. Even a city inspector, nudged by a friend on the council, appeared and read the removal orders aloud. The language was damning in its silence: no permits, no emergency clause, no legal foundation. It felt like watching a house of cards fall in slow motion, except this house of cards had names, signatures, and a timeline that mapped every arrogance the board had hidden behind polite phrases for years. By mid-morning the pressure was relentless and precise. The council opened an inquiry on the spot. A temporary injunction halted any further action by the HOA until an independent review could be completed. The board tried to spin a story about safety concerns, but their own emails, revealed in full-screen banners on local news feeds, showed a different truth: greed, procedural shortcuts, and a desire to push one homeowner out to satisfy some quiet vendetta. I felt no jubilation in that moment, only an enormous, quiet relief. Victory felt less like triumph and more like breathing after being underwater for too long. Yet the most profound shift was quieter. As the day unfolded, I walked across the shoreline to where the old pilings met the water and watched men in work boots measure, consult, and, for the first time in months, include me in the conversation. The replacement bridge, when it was rebuilt, would be done with oversight, public meetings, and transparency. My voice, once a single echo against a wall of polished power, was now one of many shaping the future of this place. It was the kind of change that settles into the bones, not merely restoring what was taken, but altering the rules so it could not happen again. Standing on my property in that warm morning light, I thought of the small humiliations that had accumulated into this crisis: late notices slipped under my door, inspectors showing up unannounced, neighbors told to mind their own business. Those things were still wounds, but now they were recorded wounds, acknowledged and visible. I took a long sip of coffee left cooling on the railing, feeling gratitude for the people who had risked speaking, for the contractors who'd finally traded discomfort for truth, for the reporters who showed up when called. The restored access would be more secure, but what mattered most was the reclamation of dignity, the simple act of no longer being spoken for, of being allowed to stand where I had always stood. As the sun climbed higher and the mist burned off the water, the neighborhood began to breathe differently. Conversations replaced rumors. Meetings replaced secret orders. I watched the bridge's reconstruction plans pinned to the temporary notice board, signatures, and conditions that would keep an eye on those who had once thought themselves above scrutiny. There was no dramatic showdown, no cinematic collapse of a villain, but in that unflashy, determined morning, something far more enduring happened: a community remembered how to be accountable. I walked back along the path, each step steady now, and for the first time in months, the world felt like mine again: sunlight on the water, a rebuilt road on the horizon, and a quiet knowledge that sometimes, the most potent victories are those that restore what was lost, quietly, in broad daylight. The morning light felt different now. The air was crisper, sharper, as if the neighborhood itself was exhaling after weeks of tension. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting the quiet that comes after a storm, but this was no ordinary calm. The bridge still bore the marks of the struggle, steel beams slightly misaligned, concrete still damp from reconstruction work. Yet it stood, a testament not just to physical access restored, but to the subtle victory that had taken months of patience and careful planning to achieve. The HOA board members were noticeably absent this morning. Rumors had spread quickly after yesterday's public exposure. Council inquiries, media coverage, and neighborhood testimonies had shaken their authority to its core. Windows that had once been drawn tightly against my gaze were now open, revealing neighbors who nodded in quiet acknowledgement as I walked past. Their silence spoke volumes, support and solidarity that had been invisible when I was isolated. I realized, standing there in the gentle sunlight, that the fight had never been solely about the bridge, it had been about reclaiming the community itself, one fractured relationship at a time. I made my way along the path I had once used as a secret escape route. The morning dew soaked my shoes, but I barely noticed. My mind replayed the chain of events, the photographs of the illegal removal, the contractor's testimonies, the emails and official documents that exposed the board's arrogance. Each piece had been a brick in a structure that finally held up against their oppression. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the board's carefully constructed veneer of control had been stripped away, exposing their actions for everyone to see. Neighbors began to approach, cautiously at first. A few shared stories of small injustices, minor fines, threats of citations, whispered pressure to conform. Their voices had been quiet for too long, but now, emboldened by the bridge's restoration and the public scrutiny of the board, they spoke openly. Listening to them, I realized that my fight had become larger than personal vindication. It had become a catalyst for collective awareness, a signal that the HOA's unchecked power was no longer absolute. The morning sun highlighted the expressions of relief and tentative hope on each face, warming more than just my skin, it warmed the neighborhood itself. By mid-morning, the work on the bridge had drawn small crowds. Engineers measured and inspected, workers checked alignment, and local council members oversaw the process. I was invited to participate in these discussions, not as a guest, but as a stakeholder whose voice mattered. It was a surreal reversal. The same people who had tried to isolate me were now forced to acknowledge my authority and input. The quiet sunlight reflected off the water, glinting like a subtle applause for the long, patient strategy that had brought me here. I paused at the edge of the bridge, looking down at the water flowing beneath it. The current seemed steady, unstoppable, a reflection of the persistence required to overcome the HOA's manipulations. I thought of the long morning spent tracing maps, planning alternate routes, and compiling evidence, of the adrenaline-fueled moments when I moved along the hidden path, cameras ready, heart pounding. Those hours had felt endless and exhausting, but standing here now, they seemed like a necessary prelude to a profound shift. The neighborhood was changing, slowly but undeniably, and I had played a pivotal role. As the sun continued to rise, bathing the bridge and surrounding property in warm light, I felt a deep sense of closure. The fight was far from over, HOA politics never truly end, but the balance had shifted. My property was accessible again, the community more aware and vigilant, and the board had been forced into accountability. I sipped my coffee, feeling its warmth seep into me, and realized that the victory was both external and internal, reclaiming space, dignity, and the subtle power that comes from knowledge, patience, and unwavering resolve. The morning stretched lazily into late morning, and with it came a quiet, almost sacred sense of restoration. The bridge stood firm, the neighbors whispered and smiled, and the HOA was left to contend with scrutiny they could no longer evade. I walked back along the hidden path, now familiar and almost comforting, knowing that the battle had changed me as much as it had changed the neighborhood. The sun's reflection on the water seemed to whisper a promise. Vigilance and courage had their rewards, and sometimes, the quietest victories are the most enduring. The morning sun rose slowly over the neighborhood, casting a soft, golden glow across my property. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of water and freshly cut grass from the surrounding gardens. For the first time in weeks, I felt a deep, steady calm settle over me. The bridge, once dismantled and a symbol of the HOA's attempt to isolate me, now stood fully restored, solid and unwavering. But the victory was no longer just about physical access, it was about reclaiming dignity, authority, and the respect I had earned through patience and strategy. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and let my gaze travel along the bridge. Workers were finishing the final inspections, and council members were reviewing documents on the site. Neighbors passed by, exchanging quiet smiles and nods of acknowledgement. Some of them had endured small, silent injustices for years, fines, harassment, and manipulation, and their faces now reflected relief, empowerment, and quiet gratitude. Seeing them there, I realized that my battle had extended far beyond myself. It had sparked a subtle but meaningful transformation in the community. As I walked along the path I had once navigated in secrecy, memories of the previous mornings flooded my mind. I remembered the panic and shock when I first saw the bridge gone, the adrenaline-fueled reconnaissance along the hidden path, the long hours poring over maps and documents, and the quiet determination that carried me through moments when defeat felt inevitable. Each step I took along that path now felt lighter, as if the land itself recognized the persistence and courage it had witnessed. By mid-morning, the HOA board had been forced to convene under public scrutiny. Their smugness was gone, replaced by tentative caution as they realized that their influence no longer went unquestioned. Local officials, neighbors, and contractors all had a voice now, and for the first time, the balance of power felt equitable. The morning light caught the edges of legal notices, emails, and documents displayed for oversight, glinting like silent proof of justice finally served. The board's arrogance had crumbled, and they were left to navigate a system that now demanded accountability. I paused at the edge of the bridge, watching the water ripple beneath the solid structure. The currents were steady, unstoppable, like the persistence that had carried me through every obstacle the HOA had thrown my way. I felt a profound sense of closure, not a loud, cinematic triumph, but a quiet, enduring victory. The property was mine to access freely. The community had begun to reclaim its voice. And most importantly, I had proven to myself that meticulous planning, courage, and patience could overcome even the most calculated attempts to isolate and intimidate. Neighbors began gathering in small groups, discussing the events of the past days, sharing their experiences, and acknowledging the change. The morning sunlight highlighted their faces, expressions of relief, newfound confidence, and subtle pride. It was more than just a physical restoration, it was a communal healing, a reclamation of space and agency that had been quietly eroded over the years. I felt a deep sense of connection with the people around me, united not just by geography, but by the shared recognition of fairness and justice. As the sun climbed higher, I took one last slow walk across the bridge. Each plank felt solid beneath my feet, a tangible symbol of resilience and perseverance. I paused at the center, letting the morning breeze brush across my face, and reflected on the journey, the shock, the planning, the risks, the revelations, and finally, the reclamation. The HOA had tried to strip me of access, control, and confidence, but in the quiet brilliance of the morning, I had regained everything. The neighborhood, once tense and silent, now thrummed with subtle life. Conversations replaced hushed whispers. Accountability replaced fear. And as I sipped my coffee one final time, watching sunlight dance on the water, I understood the true payoff. The bridge was restored, yes, but the deeper triumph was invisible yet undeniable, the restoration of dignity, respect, and the quiet but unyielding assertion of one person's right to stand firm against injustice. The morning stretched on, warm and bright, and I knew that while conflicts may return, the knowledge that patience, courage, and careful planning could reclaim what was lost would remain, unshakable, like the bridge beneath my feet.